I would just ask that the media keeps the same energy about Jimmy that they had towards Trey. If Trey had stepped out of the back of the end zone, sheesh. That's a fact, Jack, right? If Trey had stepped out of the back of the end zone, he'd be getting killed for it.
It has been, and he was doing a good job making fun of himself, a long-standing running joke on one individual, right? On, if memory serves me correct, a winless team. So the historic moment of Dan Orlovsky, who has actually really grown on me as just a guy on television, as a football guy. Used to not really care for him. Now I'm cool with him. No, I don't know him. I just mean, like, I like his takes or whatever. He was known for doing that on a winless team. The running joke was like, what an embarrassment, right? Shitty quarterback, shitty team. Like, that kind of symbolized the moment.
Right.
To do that on Sunday Night Football, honestly, guy, it is, since you and I have been doing this, I would say this, like, little run Kyle had 19 to now of Jimmy kind of establishing himself. You could say that's potentially Jimmy's worst play ever when you factor in this was not his fault. And who knows, let's knock on wood. They might have lost their best player. Best case, not for the season, but who fucking knows? The safety, actually, they could have lost their best player on the play. And if it wasn't a safety and he hadn't stepped out of bounds, it would have been a pick six. It's one of the most disastrous plays I've ever seen with my own eye. Orlovsky's that play, given that his team was a fucking joke and was winless, this Sunday Night Football, in, I don't want to say a must-win game, but an enormous game where your defense is kicking ass, you lose your best player. I mean, it's just, this play was worse than Orlovsky's. Honestly, I don't even think it's close when you factor in what was at stake.
Yeah. I mean, the difference, I'd have to go back and look at the Orlovsky play.
He kept running. Remember?
I think part of this play is on Kyle also. It was a very, whatever it was supposed to be. I don't know if he was looking for Kittle to eventually get up that sideline.
It was like a play-action boot thing.
Yeah, it was bad from the jump, and then it was bad on Jimmy's part, and then it was I don't know that you could have imagined if you had told me there's going to be a play where the guy runs out of the back of the end zone, and it actually could have been worse if he didn't, because the pick six is what I saw first. I don't know if you noticed live.
I saw his foot hit. Yeah, I did.
I thought he got close to the end line, but I thought it was a pick six. Absolute disaster of a play. Trey Lance, let's be real, has gotten his fair share of criticism, and we have, some would call it nitpick. We have said what we've thought about Trey. Jimmy has never been immune to that and is getting his just like he always has.
Jimmy's been shit on for 5 years, and he is going to get eviscerated for tonight, along with the coach starting here. I mean, that was that individual play. I will say this. You're right. It's a double factor. It's the coach and the quarterback. If you are going to call that play, which I think immediately realized, regardless of Trent, you would say the injury of Trent, a little out of everyone's control. Dude kind of got thrown in the back of his knee, right? So if you remove that and Trent had been safe, to call a play where a guy's that far back in the end zone, you would say is always risky, right? Because if a defensive lineman breaks through, you're fucked. And then it's on Jimmy to kind of know. You're starting in the end zone. There's a finite amount of space, right? You're at the 20-yard line. You don't even think about that. Or you're at the 10. You're in the color. Like, there has to be some situational awareness. One thing we agreed on Jimmy's, the potential for Jimmy to be successful is like his experience, his just kind of understanding. We never disputed Jimmy airmailing balls that were, tonight the airmail of balls were consistent with what he's been. But the situational awareness, even the pick he threw at the end of the game, they ended up getting the ball back, but the pick he threw that his former teammate, I would say made a play on the ball. He was literally just standing there and he threw it to him. It was an atrocious decision. Like, we've seen Jimmy do that before. The back of the end zone is like, this is the NFL, some situational awareness, one-on-one, like that. I would say of all the shitty things he did tonight, you could say that's almost inexcusable to just know you kind of got to stop at 8.
Yeah, I would say
you put that on more the coach or the quarterback, that play.
God, I give them equal blame on that play. I do.
It's an atrocious call, because you told me before we hopped on, I crushed on my little notes while the game was going on. I'm like, God, Nate Hackett is such a pussy for not punting. And then you realize, historically in tight games, you just always punt your defense and you just kind of play that. That's probably actually was the right move.
Well, he wanted to go for it, but Jerry Rosberg talked him out of it.
I wasn't really listening. How do you know that?
Well, I just saw one of the Broncos reporters tweeted it. The guy he just hired, Kyle Shanahan, just got outcoached by a guy that Nate Hackett hired 3 days ago.
Jerry Rosberg was the guy that said punt.
Jerry Rosberg said punt.
In fairness to Jerry Rosberg, that was the right call, right?
He's just working off the spreadsheet probably, but yeah.
I thought when I read on the internet they just hired this Jerry Rosberg analytical guy, I was just going to assume 37-year-old guy, kind of been doing. I saw the picture of him. He looks like 70 years old. When NBC went to him, he was old.
I think he'd retired, I assume.
He's just in the Denver area?
Nees says, John, tell me more about Jimmy. Tim K blocked me after the Jimmy interception. Laughy emoji.
Yeah, this was
Colin says people $10, Colin. He paid good money for this. People talking about how Trey Lance was way behind Jimmy, including Middlekauff's comments last week. It's who he's always been. Niners defense has given up 21 points in 3 games and 2-1. Maybe means 1-2, but nonetheless.
Yeah. Niners would die to be 2-1 right now. The Broncos are 2-1.
Honestly, if Trey Lance had just played that game, not that this is the whole thing. It's funny because we talk about Trey. Let me just say, we talk about Trey as if he got benched. He did not get benched. He got hurt. That's why Jimmy Garoppolo played.
Major injury, shattered ankle, torn ligaments. Like he's out for 6 to 8 months.
His deltoid and his spelloid or whatever those.
Yeah, I agree because you've been saying this all week. I didn't really, again, I haven't been living and dying. I've turned off some comments. I just can't take the screaming back at each other. But tonight it was unavoidable, at least on the twitter.com. It is being discussed like Trey is available or something. Like he is gone. Jimmy would not be playing regardless of what we thought, given the better chance. His own teammates and coaches thought, which weren't arguable. I would have guessed he's still in the hospital bed. I mean, think about that. Like he's in a hospital bed, but it's getting talked about like this is what he didn't get replaced. Like he got forced into this. They would have lived. I mean, at minimum, they would have gone down 5 or 6 games to let it get weird if it got weird. Like Trey was getting a runway. Jimmy was, let's face it, Jimmy was forced into action because his ankle was pointed that way. Now, we gave the takes after that Jimmy gave him the better chance to win. Here's what I will say. They each started 2 games where they got to play the whole thing through. Both games, they scored 10 points. Like I'm not trying to defend or whatever. Like Jimmy was atrocious tonight. I thought Trey was pretty terrible in the Chicago game. They lost them both. 2 L's, 10 points, total of 20 points. Now we do anoint the coach, like we used to say about like Sean McVay, but definitely like John Gruden, right? It's like John Gruden was the poster boy of the organization, not Derek, not Khalil. Kyle is the poster boy over Trey. Like it's Kyle's offense when it comes to the offense. Even Debo. We even said last week when you're like, or I ask you, I'm like, what was the NBC graphic, the tease for the following week? And you're like, well, it looked like they just ripped Trey off and put Debo up. And then I saw it this week. And I remember saying like, he could have just put Kyle. So it's like Kyle takes the blame when Trey scored the 10 points and when Jimmy does. Now, both Jimmy gets has a longer resume. We just know more about him. Trey's this great unknown. But bottom line, they had 2 games where they both started and they scored fucking 10 points.